Remember, if you have any questions about what you're learning, or if you just need a break, now would be a good time to take it. Doing a marathon listening session isn't great for retention. A good way to be sure you're keeping up with everything is to have a conversation with a friend or a loved one about what you're learning. If you can explain it, you will retain it. Still there? Okay, let's get into this video. So far, I've laid out the organization of the central nervous system and focused on the brain's cerebral cortex. Specifically, I've introduced how the brain handles sensory and motor information. I've also provided some extra reading on other brain functions in your course space, if you're interested. Now, I'd like to briefly introduce you to the other parts of the brain. You're almost at the end of this series. I think there are 2 videos remaining. By the end of this video, you should be able to explain the roles of tracts in the brain. You should be able to list the roles of basal nuclei in the brain and describe 2 diseases of the nuclei. You should be able to explain the functions of the diencephalon and its parts and explain the function of the cerebellum. The cerebrum is covered by a layer of gray matter called the cerebral cortex. Deep to that is a mass of white matter, and as you can see in this image, it branches extensively throughout the hemispheres. This white matter is composed of the myelinated axons of neurons that have their cell bodies in the gray matter. The function of this white matter is to facilitate communication both within the cerebral hemispheres and between the hemispheres and between the brain and the inferior central nervous system. The myelinated axons are bundled together to form tracts, and there are 3 types of tracts in the brain. The first tract is composed of association fibers. These are horizontal fibers that connect different parts of the same hemisphere. So you can see them highlighted in red in this image. Next, you have commissural fibers. These are fibers that run horizontally and they connect the gray matter of the left hemisphere to the gray matter of the right hemisphere. In this image, you can see that they're highlighted in green. And if you're already up on your brain anatomy, you'll recognize that these fibers are in the corpus callosum, that bundle of white matter that connects the left and right hemispheres. Finally, we have projection fibers. They're highlighted in purple here. And as you can see, they travel vertically. They connect the left and right hemispheres of the brain to the lower brain and to the spinal cord. As you can see in this frontal section of the brain, interspersed amongst the white matter are islands of gray matter. These are integration centers, and they're called basal nuclei or sometimes basal ganglia. As you can see in this image at the bottom right of your screen, the basal ganglia are centrally located in the brain. They are highlighted by these structures colored red. The list of functions for your basal nuclei is somewhat long. They influence your muscle movement, they influence thinking and emotion, they filter out inappropriate responses, both motor as well as emotional, they inhibit antagonistic or unnecessary movements, and they regulate the intensity of slow and repetitive purposeless movements. These are movements that people might make for no reason. The list of diseases that have been linked to the basal nuclei is long. 2 of the ones that you're probably most familiar with are Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease. In Parkinson's disease, cells in the substantia nigra begin to die. These cells usually produce dopamine, a very important neurotransmitter that plays a role in motor control. In addition, there are at least 5 major pathways connecting the basal ganglia with different motor cortices, association cortices in the limbic system. When the substantia nigra is disrupted, so is the connection between it and these other areas of the brain, resulting in some of the symptoms that we associate with Parkinson's, like coarse, slow tremors, disturbances in motor planning and initiation of movement. Although we may think of tremors as being the only sign of Parkinson's, a major sign is also the rigidity of limbs, which is called bradykinesia in medicine. Another potential symptom is problems with executive function. Executive function refers to mental processes that help us to plan, remember rules and instructions, think abstractly, and inhibit inappropriate responses and actions. They also help us to focus attention, among other tasks. Parkinson's is a progressively degenerative disease. I've posted a video from the University College Dublin Medical School showing some of the tests and responses in Parkinson's patients. The link is to the upper right side of this slide. If you have time, you should consider taking a look. Huntington's disease is a genetically inherited disease in which abnormal cytosine, adenine, guanine repeats are inserted into the gene for Huntington protein. As a result, this protein misfolds and begins to accumulate in neurons located in the caudate nucleus. As a result, the caudate nucleus begins to atrophy. Now, the problem with this is that these neurons produce 2 neurotransmitters. One is called GABA, and the other one is called substance P. Both of these are inhibitory neurotransmitters. They are supposed to reduce the likelihood that an action potential occurs. The diencephalon is composed of 3 main structures. You have the thalamus, located in green here, which is a relay station. You have the hypothalamus, which is in orange, which has major roles in homeostasis. And then you have the epithalamus, which is kind of covering the whole thing. The epithalamus houses several nuclei. The thalamus, which is colored green in this image, acts as a relay station for impulses from the lower central nervous system that are on their way to the cerebral cortex. It sorts, edits, and relays action potentials from the hypothalamus that would be regulating emotion and visceral function. Action potentials from the cerebellum out here. And action potentials from the basal nuclei get routed through here to help direct motor control and motor functions. You have action potentials also that get relayed that are related to memory and sensory integration. That means that the thalamus has a role in mediating sensation, motor activities, cortical activities, learning, and memory. The hypothalamus is in orange here, and it's located inferiorly to the thalamus, and it's a major center for homeostatic control. It plays a role in controlling the autonomic functions. Remember, those are your involuntary functions, like blood pressure, the rate and force of heartbeats, and the activity of the digestive tract. It also plays a role in maintaining our body temperature. It's involved in our hunger and thirst responses. And as a member of the limbic system, the hypothalamus initiates our response to emotions, and it perceives pleasure, fear, rage. It perceives our sex drive and our sleep-wake cycles as well. The hypothalamus is connected to the pituitary gland via a stalk called the infundibulum, which would be right here. The pituitary gland is called the master gland because it secretes numerous hormones that initiate essential functions like muscle and bone growth, sexual maturation, and it influences functions like our metabolism and our stress response. Finally, the epithalamus sits on top of the thalamus, hence the prefix epi. This region contains many nuclei and connects the limbic system, remember that's the emotional seat of the brain, to other parts of the brain. It also has roles in mediating the secretion of hormones by the pituitary and regulating motor pathways. An important part of the epithalamus can be found posteriorly, right around in here. This is the pineal gland. Sometimes some people say pineal, I say pineal. So this is the pineal gland. This gland is an important producer of the hormone melatonin. Melatonin is called the sleep hormone because it helps our bodies know when it's time to sleep and when it's time to wake up. Typically, the pineal gland produces more hormone at night, and then the amount decreases by morning. Your circadian rhythms and the amount of light that you receive influences how much melatonin this gland produces. Now, some people take melatonin for insomnia, a condition in which people have trouble falling asleep and staying asleep. Inferior to the diencephalon is the third area of the brain, the brainstem. It's composed of three primary regions. You have the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla oblongata. So the brainstem primarily controls automatic functions that are essential for human life. At the very distal end here, you have the medulla oblongata. It connects the brain to the spinal cord at the foramen magnum. It's here that those pyramidal neurons that we talked about that are in the descending motor tract, they decussate around here. You also have a number of cranial nerves located in this region. You have the vestibular cochlear nerve, the accessory nerve, the vagus, the hypoglossal. They're all here. These are cranial nerves that convey a number of sensory and motor impulses to and from the spinal cord, but they are part of that brain region because they're part of the brainstem. Superiorly in teal, which you can't really see very well in this particular image, it would be like up in this area, you have the midbrain, which contains a number of important gray matter nuclei mixed throughout the white matter in this area. The red nucleus is located here. It's an important relay point for descending signals involved in moving the limbs. The substantia nigra is also part of the midbrain. These nuclei are mostly relay centers that send action potentials from the spinal cord towards the thalamus. So the red nuclei send information this way. The substantia nigra send information that way. All right, now let's talk about the pons. The pons you'll recognize because it has this kind of anterior bulge. It's very prominent. The pons is composed of conduction tracts that connect the spinal cord to higher centers in the brain and relay information from the motor cortex to the cerebellum. The pons has some nuclei that help maintain our ability to breathe, and it's the origin for three cranial nerves. You have the trigeminal in this area, the abducens, and the facial. These nerves control movements and muscles associated with the face, as well as providing sensory information from the face. All right. All right, now let's talk about another area of the brain, this one. This is the cerebellum. It's dorsal to the pons and medulla. Are you familiar with the field sobriety test? It's the test that law enforcement officers give or gave to determine whether drivers are drunk behind the wheel. The test famously includes having the driver walk a straight line or touch their nose with the fingertip of an outstretched hand or stand on one foot. The test is also a test of cerebellar function, believe it or not. The cerebellum, or the little brain, is located posteriorly from the pons and medulla. Although it's only 10 to 11% of the brain's mass, it holds over 50% of the brain's neurons. Functionally, the cerebellum is a master refiner. For years, we have known that one of the major functions of this part of the brain is to process information from the cerebral cortex, the brainstem, and the sensory receptors to coordinate and refine muscle movements, especially those that are repetitive. It also helps us to maintain posture and balance, and it aids in proprioception. Proprioception is our ability to know where our limbs are in space. Have you ever wondered why you can get on a bike after 10 years or more of not riding, and your body somehow knows how to do it? You can thank your cerebellum for that. The effect of alcohol on the cerebellum is an ongoing area of study, but we do know that neurons in the cerebellum are exceptionally vulnerable to the effects of alcohol, as evidenced by how the body responds when drunk. Prolonged exposure, as in the case of alcoholism, can lead to degeneration and permanent reduction in motor control. We also know that children born with fetal alcohol syndrome often have fewer cerebellar neurons, and they have a reduction in cerebellar volume. Now, did you know there are people who have no cerebellum? Believe it or not, it is absolutely possible to live without this area of the brain. The disorder is called cerebellar agenesis. Okay, and studies with patients who were born with no cerebellum suggest that the cerebellum may also play a role in refining speech, cognition, so our thoughts, and personality. I'm posting a link to the upper right corner of the slide to an interview with Jonathan Kelleher, who NPR reports is one of the few people to live to adulthood without the cerebellum. Listen to it. It's well worth it. Jonathan, if I remember correctly, is actually from Massachusetts. Now, the cerebellum, just like the cerebrum, has left and right hemispheres. Okay. It also features gyri, except the gyri are called folia, so you can kind of see them here on this image. They run in the transverse plane. The surface of the cerebellum also has a thin cortex of gray matter that covers a tree-like arrangement of white matter. The tree-like arrangement of white matter shown here is called the arbor vitae. So here's a little idea of how the cerebellum works, how it coordinates our motor activity. First, it receives impulses from the cerebral cortex about the intent to initiate a voluntary muscle contraction. After that, it receives information from the proprioceptors. Remember, again, they tell your brain something about the position of your body parts in space. The cerebellum also gets information from your visual and equilibrium pathways as well. They help your cerebellum to know something about momentum in addition to body position. After that, the cerebellar cortex calculates the best way to smoothly coordinate muscle contraction. And then it sends a blueprint of coordinated movements to the cerebral motor cortex and the brainstem nuclei to actually carry that out. Something interesting to note is just like in the cerebrum, there's also a motor homunculus that we see in the cerebellum. and this is a picture of it here on the right side of this slide. Alright, so in this video we've talked a bit about the functions of the different types of tracts that we find in the brain. We've talked about how they communicate within a hemisphere or between the left and right cerebral hemispheres. We've also talked about the roles of the basal nuclei in the brain, and we've specifically talked about 2 diseases of the nuclei. You might want to remember that. That's a possible test question. We talked about the functions of the diencephalon and its parts, and we've talked about the function of the cerebellum. If you have any questions about this video or any of my others, please don't hesitate to reach out by text or email, or come by my office, even if it's on Zoom, so that we can talk about it. I hope that your studying is going well. The light is at the end of the tunnel. Good luck. I'll see you at the next video.